Hey guys, Youngblood with you to summarize the Around the Verse from July 6th, and in this episode we find out that the work on the overall cockpit experience is continuing, really focusing on making the task of sitting in the cockpit a more dynamic experience, focusing on the way that you enter the cockpit, the way information is displayed, and how you experience things like G-forces and hits, and blacking out. Close combat, including knife and unarmed takedowns, are moving along nicely, and programming teams have been really working with other departments to make sure that that all ends up flowing well in the game. In some really positive news, the testing of the Delta Patcher, which is going to allow for small updates to be downloaded and installed instead of the full patch, has been moving along nicely, and we're waiting on QA to basically give their approval, though it looks really good at this point. The hologram system is receiving work through the render-to-texture program, focusing on holograms being used for things like briefings, calls, mobiGlass, and other places requiring holograms to be displayed, which is going to include things like the new user interface and handling calls between players. They're also working on the lighting in space, dealing with the drastic differences between the darkest dark and the brightest bright, and working to stop artificially over-brightening based on the source being in focus. Now, new ship weapons are moving forward, still focusing on the laser cannons and laser repeaters that are being developed, and in FPS weapons, the heavy machine gun is progressing as well. The art teams are working on their procedural tech for cities and working to allow them to make quick, large cities and landing sites and populating them in the way you would expect them to be. In order to make space have a little bit more to it, they're working on their dust shader system, which will be seen in Yellow's asteroid belt to help with the visual presentation. Outposts have been finished, at least for the major styles, including emergency shelters, relay stations, and abandoned outposts, as well as branding mechanics for companies and organizations. Now, on a larger scale, the truck stop is still moving forward, focusing on polishing what they have and optimizing assets to require less resources to render, and now they're moving on to the insides. One such interior location is a type of admin office to help with completing missions provided around the Stanton system. And speaking of new locations on stations, Grimhex will now have a ship's part trader and an electronics store, both of which are going to be unaffiliated with the big brands that we know today. mobiGlass rework is continuing and is looking fantastic, working on using the new render-to-texture that I already mentioned. And the idea is to implement different apps like the star map to allow for navigation and research from your arm, and adding in other basic programs that have been reworked like the mission manager. Going past that a bit, they're also continuing to work on the ship's MFDs and potentially some ties to your mobiGlass. As part of the work to give us things to do, the ship's team has also been working on more derelicts and how they're going to present themselves, including the Constellation, the Starfarer, the Caterpillar, and the Freelancer, which can be found in space and on the surfaces of moons and planets. The Whole Sea has had the geometry work done on the folding middle section, which I'm sure was incredibly complicated to do, and they've successfully have it working now without any collisions. They've since moved on to finishing out the rear of the interior of the Whole Sea, and they have it all blocked out. The Eclipse, like many military ships we've seen before, appears to continue to have priority and is already underway according to CIG, and is having the work on the cockpit done right now, as well as focusing on the landing gear and the wings. The Reclaimer, which we have seen a lot of recently, is almost completed, leaving only 3 rooms left to finalize the art process. Apparently the cockpit, which we haven't really seen much of lately, includes screens that are going to sort of wrap around you because it's very tight quarters to allow for better usage of the space and for you to see what you need, as well as having the tractor beam seats. They're currently finished as well. The behind the scenes this week was focused on the procedural generation of the moons, and that we're going to end up being seen pretty soon, as well as just transitioning that tech elsewhere, and it was pretty awesome, really. The creation of the moons is really following the same planetary tech that we've seen before, allowing for unique qualities of each location, like the ecosystems that are present there, different gravity levels, and weather that's tied to the atmosphere that's present. We also get confirmation that already, based on the technology, that you're able to progress to and from planets without any loading or cutscenes, making for a smooth experience in and out of the planet. The object scattering that we've heard about recently is being used on these locations to provide an object-filled environment without looking like it's too empty or too cluttered, thus breaking your immersion. And in addition to that object scattering, there is an algorithm in place for things like bigger objects like trees and rocks and stuff to make it feel more natural. And speaking of natural, they will be having real-time lighting determined by the time of day on the planet and where it's located in the system. Frankly, there was a lot more information given, but these were kind of the highlights that I wanted to make sure I shared with you. So if you want some of the more technical details, there is a link to watch this episode in the description. So that's it for this episode of Summarize the Verse. Let me know if you have questions. Otherwise, stay tuned for more, and have yourselves a great day. Take care.